Hey everybody, I'm Rob. This is Dashboard, and in this video, I'm going to talk about how you can start getting set up with your Outriggers. Now, before we go any further, take note. Your Outriggers have come with ripstop and rail hanger pre-installed in a position for shipping, just to keep them safe. They're not on the outside of the Outrigger as you will use them. They're stored on the inside. So make sure you look for those before thinking perhaps you didn't receive them, because that's where they'll be. Okay, so step one is we're just going to open up the Outrigger. Now, you have two knobs, and you only need to loosen them a little bit to get this thing to move. I like to put a foot down here just to keep everything stable while I'm doing this. Loosen the knob like half a turn maybe, just it'll come loose easily, and open up the frame and tighten the knobs, make those nice and tight. And you're all set for the next step. Okay, so we're upside down on the bench here just so you can see. The way we're going to attach it to this bench or any other bench is via these two knobs, and there's a T-bolt here. You'll see that the T-bolt passes through a hole. There's also a slotted hole. So the slotted hole is for non-dashboard benches that might have a mounting track at a different elevation than what there is on our bench. But for dashboard, you're going to use the round hole and the T-bolt. So you should just loosen those, so there's some space, 1/8 inch, 3 millimeters anyway, between the T-bolt and the frame. Okay, so here I have my Outrigger with two loose T-bolts, and I'm going to just slip them into the lower track on the bench. Now, as you get one in and then push it along farther to get the second one in, it's good if you push this surface against that surface to keep it a smooth operation. Let's see if I can actually do that. Pushing against there keeps it pretty smooth. And then I'll get the second one in. And now I'm going to bring this down here past the cut strip on the bench and just leave that there for a moment, and we'll line it up next. All right, so for this first Outrigger, I like to just have it live right here relatively on the bench. That gives me the ability to do crosscuts. I can put the front guide rub bracket here. I can do narrow crosscuts, wide crosscuts up to a full sheet, no problem, depending on the accessories I use. And it's generally convenient. And also I can cut narrower pieces if I want, because I have access to get in here and reach a narrower piece for a cut. So I just like to leave it like this, because then I'm always ready for crosscuts and long rips. If I'm splitting a sheet, for example, this will hold up the offcut. So let's get 3 bench dogs that you have from other things you bought from us. I'm just going to put one here, and one over here. So there's 2 things we're going to do. We're going to line up the Outrigger this way, and we're going to make sure it planes out with the bench top. So it's easy if you use a straight edge to just make sure that you have all these 3 things lined up. So that's basically it. I've got them all touching, and now we can move to planing out the 2 tops. Okay, so now we're planing out the 2 pieces. I've got the level, my straight edge, set on the bench and set on the Outrigger. You can see I've got a tapered gap here because the Outrigger is low. So let's move on to the next step. Okay, now this is tricky to film just because of the angle. I can't show you the underside and the top at the same time. I'll try to cut something in. But I've got my tapered gap up here to the straight edge. I just use my thumb. I'm going to just push up on the Outrigger, and I'm looking at that gap closing up, and now everything's in the same line, and simply tighten the knob. Now it's all set up. So depending on the terrain where everything is sitting, you may need to, in fact, adjust the levelers on the bench, or you may need to adjust the levelers on the Outrigger to get this to work. But you have that adjustability. You don't need tools to do it, and it's no problem. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other end of the Outrigger. Watch this gap close. I just lift it up to make that nice and tight, secure the knob, and we're in good shape. So I'll just put the other Outrigger on the opposite end of the bench. And we'll take a look at that. Okay, so I've leveled up this Outrigger, and just so there's no misunderstanding, I have aligned the side of this outrigger with the end of the bench, just where the clamp tracks are. Now, these are not designed to do that and line up these grids of holes for a lot of reasons, but mainly among them is it doesn't matter because it's not relevant that they need to line up. If you want to move the outrigger a little bit to line them up to do something special, it's really just a slight change in position that would require that. Now, in fact, if you were going to be using the ripstop on this outrigger, I like to usually move the outrigger in a little bit so the ripstop is inside of the end of the bench a little bit. It could be easier for you to set the ripstop if it's a little bit farther along this way on the rail that runs here. So that's totally up to you, but just so you understand, they're not designed to match up in both ways, and it's really not relevant. So nothing to worry about. So you saw where the ripstop is located in the leg in the last scene, but now we'll talk about the rail hanger. We're just gonna use one of the wrenches that came with the rest of the accessories you bought. If you didn't buy any other accessories, it's a 5/32 or 4mm hex wrench. And this is one of the very few places with our system where you're actually going to need to use a tool to set something up. So you just loosen that and try to make sure that the little T-nut there doesn't get lost, but then you just pop it in the other side like so, tighten this up, and then you're ready to use the rail hanger. Of course, you can put this on this side of the leg, on that side of the leg, wherever you like. That's all there is to it. All right, so now we have the two outriggers set up in what I think of as an ideal arrangement on the dashboard. Of course, as you've probably seen before, the ripstop can be set in here on this side of this outrigger or over here, very simply. And fold it up for use, fold it down when you need it out of the way. You might use one ripstop on this end of this outrigger and one on the far end of the other one, or two on the same outrigger if you're ripping a shorter piece. Lots of flexibility. I also have the front guide rail bracket set up here, so I'm good to go for a wide variety of cuts. Now, I do like to keep a track star over here to help support the end of longer rips. I find that if I'm, let's say, splitting a full sheet, you of course have a lot of support with the two outriggers, but there's some that's still unsupported out here. So the track star really helps to keep that end section of the piece from deflecting once you finish a cut. So now we're all set up on the dashboard system with outriggers, and we'll talk about using them on some other benches. All right, now we come around to the Festool MFT3. You can certainly attach the outrigger to this bench. Move the hardware for mounting to the vertically slotted holes on the front of the outrigger's frame. You're going to need that vertical adjustment because this track on their bench is not aligned with the bottom track on our bench. Now, keep in mind, this bench has only one leveler. So there's a lot less ability to adjust to uneven floors or other surfaces, which is really the best thing about our bench in that we have levelers everywhere. So you can really dial in a larger arrangement of parts, no problem, with an uneven surface. So you may need to shim up one side of this bench in order to get these guys to plane out. Not much, but a little. One benefit of putting an outrigger on the MFT3 is that it does add quite a bit of rigidity in it in one direction anyway, because the outrigger is inflexible and this is not. But let's go and take a look at another type of bench you can use the outrigger with. Okay, so as a last example, I've mocked up a representation of a table you might have built from some T-slot extrusion like this. This is a 4080 series. A lot of customers use 1530. You can use 10 series depending on whether it's tall enough to be useful. So you would move the hardware on the outrigger to the vertically slotted holes for this, just like on the Festool table, because you do need a little bit more adjustment where you slide the hardware into this lower track here. But It's, again, no problem to attach this to a frame you might have made yourself. Now, some people will build a wooden frame and put on just like standard T-track. This is 3/4 by a half, which would be 18 by 12-ish millimeters. You just want to make sure that it has a minimum of about a 7mm slot opening. This is really 9. And interior slot width needs to be at least 12 millimeters to use our hardware with Outriggers. So that is the other scenario. I think this covers as many bases as we can for setting up the Outrigger. Thanks for watching.